Okay, so let's open the Experiential Learning Congress with this very valuable keynote panel. Okay, so let me make an opening speech, and I'll give the floor to you to make our opening words, and then we can start our conversation. So dear participants, I have the honor to welcome you to the first Experiential Learning Congress that we are organizing in Turkey. We are very excited. We are very happy. Now I'm in a hotel, actually, in a room, and there are other rooms that are, participants are like team. They are there watching, also working. So normally we plan to do it in person, a physical Congress, but still blended. People could connect online. But due to this COVID pandemic that we are facing all the world, so we had to do it online. Actually, it was a bit disappointing, because we were dreaming a lot to do it physically. But on the other hand, we discovered that how much advantages that we are getting while we are doing this online, because still participants are joining. So we received really a big number of participation from different countries all around the world. So this virtual platform enables us to connect with different parts of the world. This is beautiful. I would like to really thank you from my heart on behalf of our team, organizing team, all our partners, to David and Alice. Thank you very much. Being with us, accepting to be the honorary presidents of this Congress. It's really a big added value. People are very excited to meet with you here, even virtual, to listen you, ask you questions. That's why I just wanted to pass all the excitements that not only I have, but I know that many people has. So with this speech, we are opening the Experiential Learning Congress, and I would like to give the floor to dear panelists here, so to make a welcome speech, and then I'll pass to my questions. Okay, who would like to start? Alice?
Hi, everybody. I'm Alice Kolb. I am so excited to be here with you all, although I cannot see you, but I feel the energy through Mustafa. And Mustafa and Ilke, thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this wonderful Congress. And I'm looking forward to have heated debate, exciting debate, and conversation on experiential learning. And I am, again, very excited here to be with you.
Great. Thank you, Alice, again. So, David?
Yes, I'd echo Alice's enthusiasm about being here with you all to talk about my favorite subject, experiential learning. It's such a wonderful opportunity to connect with folks around the world who come together because we share the ideas of experiential learning and furthering its research and practice. I'd also like to echo your statement that it's really nice to be together face to face in a conference, and we're all used to that. But I also have to say that what a wonderful thing Zoom and the internet is for us all. I mean, I'm having these days so many wonderful conversations with people all over the world, and tuned in to things that I could never be if I had to climb on planes and fly back and forth and so on. So while it's not kind of hanging around the bar together or whatever that we have at the conference, it is just wonderful to have the opportunity for this exchange. And I'd like to also say that Ilke and Mustafa have been such wonderful colleagues in Turkey. Ilke with her research, and Mustafa as a big part of the Institute for Experiential Learning and our work on community of practice and so on. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, David. It's great to see you both here. So, Ilke?
Yes, I'm really excited. I'm so excited. And I also would like to state that I'm so happy to be here with David and Alice and with all the participants. This is a really big moment for me, and I think for all of us. Thank you for their participation. This is really great honor to us.
Great, great. Okay, thank you, Ilke. So the Congress is open. So dear participants, you know, while preparing this session, I was thinking how to structure. I mean, come on, this is the VIP session. So we are opening the Congress, and there is Alice Kolb and David Kolb, and how to structure, what kind of questions I should ask. Of course, there are many questions that people are wondering. But then I said, okay, I need a framework. I need a pattern to structure this panel. And then I noticed that there is a beautiful one. There is a great one, which is formalized by them actually, which is experiential learning cycle. Yes. So I said, okay, why we are not turning around this cycle? So, so we are going to talk on different topics, step by step. We are turning around the experiential learning cycle. So this is gonna be another great experience. So that's why I would like to start with the first step of the experiential learning cycle. And I would like to direct my question to Alice and David first, and then Ilke, we can answer as well. You know, you devoted your life to experiential learning, you know, and still you are working on experiential learning, to develop experiential learning. And we can see all these outputs from your articles, studies, from your books. But there is something that maybe we can't see among those letters, the story behind. So could you please tell us the story? How did you first time met with experiential learning, and what was the trigger? What was the motivation for you to start and work on experiential learning? Who would like to start?
Well, first of all, Mustafa, you're a very brave man to ask an old man to reminisce. The events that you're talking about occurred for me over 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting to me about that is I have pictures in my head that are pretty, like a snapshot, pretty vivid pictures that still I can call up in my mind. And it's a tribute to, you know, what we know about experiential learning promoting episodic memory. Mm-hmm. So I think we all have experiences that have stuck with us for our whole life. In my case, particularly about finding experiential learning, I guess there are two that I would suggest that happened in 1965 and 66. I came to MIT from Harvard, where I had received this wonderful education in psychology. But you know, the one thing I didn't get any education about was how to teach. Mm-hmm. And what I learned about how to teach was by modeling myself after my professors who lectured and who taught me that what they were saying was just the most important stuff in the world. So when I went to MIT, my picture is as a professor there, I'm standing at the lectern looking out over this sea of crew-cut engineers. And back in the 60s, as you know, the length of your hair was a big indication of sort of how conservative you were and everything like that. So I kind of was delivering these lectures, which I was convinced were the greatest things ever about motivation and everything like that. And I want to tell you, they were not buying any of it. And my first years teaching large classes in that way was traumatic. So that's an experience. Trauma is an experience.
That's true.
And the next summer, I went to Bethel, Maine for a 2-week tea group. And so some of you may know that tea groups were founded by Kurt Lewin, basically self-analytic groups. These were groups where instead of having experts observe, the participants themselves were experts, and their job was to share this. And so it was a very intense, emotional kind of experience. And my picture there was standing on the front porch of this old Victorian house amid the trees, sunset, sunrise, pink sunrise early in the morning at the beginning of the first week. And I felt so close to the people who were in my group, and was feeling emotions and thoughts that I just had never imagined that I would feel. And it stood in such a stark contrast, to skip ahead for a second, to what I had been experiencing in my classes, you know, that the kind of education that was going on there was so profoundly different. And as those of you who have read Experiential Learning or parts of our papers and so on, we took from the tea group Lewin's model of experiencing, what we now call experiencing, reflecting, thinking, and acting, as a way to manage a group, and said, what if we applied that with my engineering student friends in the management school? And that was the beginning of starting the first experiential textbook in organization behavior in 1971. And at that time, we published the first learning style inventory. And as they say, the rest is history.
Wow. So I think, you know, this story is kind of album, you know, there are different pictures and photos in every page. And so this is not only one moment, but a combination of different moments. Beautiful. Thank you, David, for sharing. Alice, what about your story? Can we hear yours as well?
My story is of facing inconvenient truths, you know. I started teaching early in my life. I was teaching probably in my 20s, and I was a trainer, and I used to train adults probably 20 years older than I was. And I think, like David, I was pretty successful in teaching, and at least I thought, you know, back then. So in 1987, I came to US, and I had finished my doctorate in Japan in industrial relations, so I came and said, well, I have to start learning about the system in the US. So I enrolled in master's program, and that's in 1987. I was, you know, given Kolb Lowenstein inventory, you know, to take the Kolb Lowenstein inventory. And at the time, I didn't think much of it. But in 1993, for the first time, I read the Experiential Learning book, 1984, by David. And as I read through the book, I started getting very upset with the book. And the reason is everything that the book said was telling me that I was not that of a great teacher from the first off, you know, so. And that was pretty sort of a stuck and struck moment that John Dewey say, you know, like talk about episodic memory, you know. I was not happy with what I was reading in the Experiential Learning book, because it's challenged my, you know, preconceived notion or philosophy, whatever that I had about being a good teacher. And I think this was a struck moment, because this really reveals the key principles of experiential learning, which is learning is all about relearning, you know. Mm-hmm. And it's about modifying your belief system and also discard some stuff that it does not, you know, there's no use for you anymore. But you still hang on to those ideas that, in my case, you know, I was taught in this traditional way, and I was teaching my students in traditional way, you know. So, and then if you teach in traditional way, the students will give you good feedback. And you believe in those feedback because you think that they're giving you feedback that your teaching is, you know, pretty awesome. And experiential learning theory, as I read it, was saying otherwise. So, and then what happened, because my belief was that teaching is my business and learning is not my business. Learning is about, you know, this is about students. So there was this, you know, big, you know, divide between what it is to be experiential educator and my attitude toward learning, you know, which was at the time was non-existent. So as I moved toward, you know, started training myself, so to speak, understand experiential learning deeper and deeper, my confidence started eroding more and more. I thought, oh my God, because I goes up. When you start something new, you know, it's the developmental process. It's quite, you know, you go through these ups and downs. So in the beginning, I started doing experiential learning, doing a bunch of exercises, games, and, you know, let's build tower, let's get together and do stuff. Some students were so happy, the other students were miserable. And one time, the coordinator of my department came to me and said, hey, Alice, somebody's complaining about you. And the student said that this instructor doesn't know anything about what she's doing. And it could be that he was right, you know, because I was trying to find my way into the experiential learning through experimentations. Mm-hmm. And those, you know, experiences happen over time. But then I realized that this is what students are perceiving about your teaching, you know. So that's how I started my experiential learning, through, you know, fits and starts, and it's a lot of experimentation, disappointments, some success and failures. And this is where I am right now. And so I think the most important thing that I've learned, and I think we're going to touch bases on, touch later on the idea of lifelong learning. So experiential learning for me has been an ongoing process of becoming, and I'm still not there. And so this is how I started, and I continue to do my research. I continue to engage in some sort of, you know, interaction and teaching and so forth. But I think this is, the beauty of experiential learning, that it never ends, but also there's a lot of new surprises and discoveries that never end. So this is my story.
Great. Alice, lovely. I mean, actually, I didn't know exactly your background of this delivering trainings, and yeah, it's great to know. And yes, we will definitely come to that journey of becoming at the end, and which is related with lifelong learning as well. But before passing to the other side of the cycle, I would like to hear also the story of İlke, because she's an academician in Turkey, a young professor, and she's really doing a lot about experiential learning. So she as you know, in her doctorate, right? So dissertation, she worked on the learning styles. So in this Congress, we are working together. So İlke, where this experiential learning love comes from?
Okay. I met experiential learning during my doctoral between 2001 and 2002. I was working as a research assistant at the university. Before then, I had worked at a primary school as a teacher for nearly 2 years. And I was trying to create an effective learning environment in my classroom by applying different methods. During my I observed that while some students learned happily, the others were unsatisfied in each practice. Mm-hmm. At that time, Turkish education system was far from constructive or learner-centered education approaches. And I felt the lack of something as an educator. I felt that I had to design my classes according to my students' individual differences. And while researching, I met Kolb's experiential learning theory. And I told myself, yes, this is what I'm looking for. As I went on to reading, learned about its deep theoretical grounds, and realized how suitable the experiential learning was for the human nature. The experiential learning was a practice enabling me to use different options together. Hence, I focused on designing a course in line with the stages of experiential learning cycle. And I decided to study on experiential learning in my doctoral thesis, as you said before. Firstly, I adapted the Kolb's Learning Styles Inventory 3 to Turkish, and then implemented experiential learning theory in an experimental study. The findings showed that the experiential learning affected both students' achievements and affective features of them, and students were happy. In that process, I had some questions in my mind about scoring the learning styles inventory and the implementation of the theory. And one day, I decided to ask these questions to David. The next day, David Kolb replied my email and made some explanations to my questions. This was something great experience for me and a big motivation as a PhD student. In the later years, I applied experiential learning at different education levels. This is how my first experiential learning experience was, Mustafa. And
Great, great.
yes, this is my story. And thank you, David, again, after many years. Thank you so much.
Thank you for telling me that, Ilke. It's a motivation to do a better job of answering my emails.
So, David, you're responding your emails and what happens?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Wow, great. Okay, well, there are three people from more the theoretical background. Well, I feel a bit more closer to Alice in that case, because I'm also a trainer in the field. So recently I'm dealing with theory, with all your support to discovering the deeper theoretical side, but I can say I'm the field guy, so who is mainly practicing and delivering trainings. Actually, that's why my story is related with a practice and experience. I'm coming from European Youth Works, like non-formal education field. Actually, this project is very much related. It's Dialogue for Non-Formal Education project. And tomorrow also today and tomorrow, we will have speakers from that field to talk about experiential learning and European Youth Works. Because in European Youth Works, Alice, as before I explained to you, experiential learning is being used a lot. And there are a diverse, like methodological, let's say, garden. It's really a lot of practice, a lot of tools, methods. And we are coming from that tradition. And I was a university student. I was a youth worker, a volunteer, and delivering training programs in different cities of Turkey. And this training programs was about youth works, how to write a youth project, how to get a grant, but also how to implement this project with interactive teaching, learning methodologies with experiential learning. And there was one training program, and those times I was not really thinking about to continue as a trainer in my career, future career. And there was one participant who is actually older than me. I was 20s, early 20s, and he was like late 40s. And at the end of the training, he just approached me, and he was a teacher. And he said, Mustafa, I have to confess one thing. I have to admit one thing. He said, yes, I didn't learn anything. I haven't learned anything out of this course. And when I go back, I will not write a project because I didn't learn. I didn't understand. I said, it's okay. But then he continued. He said, but I learned one thing. Do you remember we were playing those games, Mustafa, with experiencing, and we were talking about those experiences. After those sessions, I learned one thing. I have a daughter, 5 years old girl, and I noticed that I'm not hugging her enough. Now I will go back home. I will not write a project, but I will hug my daughter. That night, I didn't sleep. And I said, Mustafa, you really have no idea what kind of tool you have in your hands, the power of experiential learning. And then I really decided to continue. We opened the association, Experiential Training Center, in 2009. And then now, you know, from there to here, it's great experience that we are doing this Congress with you. So it's very much related with those stories behind. So this is how I started. Yeah, beautiful. You know, you're doing something. You're developing a theory, and then someone is taking this and doing some games or doing some training programs, and then another person taking this and using in some training, and a girl is being hugged from her father. So this is the chain of all these different stories, and which is beautiful, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Beautiful story, Mustafa.
Yeah. Okay, let me pass to the second part, where mainly I would like to talk about your observations. So let's pass to the reflective observation. Do you think that experiential learning is well understood enough? What are misinterpretations in the field? I mean, we can both talk a theoretical part, also the practical part. What kind of misinterpretations, misunderstandings you are witnessing in the field about experiential learning? Yeah, can we just hear your overall observation so far?
Well, I think the misunderstanding over time, I think is becoming more clarified.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in the early times, and it's even still now, I think experiential learning is viewed as a activity that you just play games and, you know, rope courses or outdoor exercises and, you know, going abroad and have some experiences. And I think a lot of programs are, I think their premise of designing those courses are based on those idea that experiential learning is just about doing stuff, you know. And I think that perception is slowly changing, that experiential learning actually is more than that, that it's more like a philosophical, you know, it's a philosophy of education. So I think the broader way, I think that's one of the misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
And on a more narrowed way, I think when you start applying experiential learning or learning cycle or learning styles into your research, for example, and then you go into practice, is that, for example, one misunderstanding about the learning cycle is that people think that the learning cycle always have to start with a concrete experience. You know, and this is a misunderstanding because when David wrote this book, first in 1984, this book says that experiential learning cycle is an idealized form of human learning. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people drop this idea, idealized. So they think that experiential learning is concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, active experimentation, always happen that way, which is totally contradicts the idea because then you're flattening this process, you know. It's not a sequential thing. If you make it into a sequence, you just break up the experiential learning cycle and just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step. You never go back to concrete experience. So that's the contradiction. So in experiential learning model actually models actual life, which actual life is far messier than, you know, this idealized form. Mm-hmm. So in a classroom, for example, you can start from, you know, abstraction, toss them a theory and reflect on a theory and talk about experience about those theories. And then later on, you know, you've tried to experiment with this. So the learning cycle is far more dynamic than that. So it gives teachers and educators or, you know, anybody who is designing training far more leverage in starting where in which cycle, you know, which part of the cycle you start. The important things that I think everybody has to understand, it doesn't matter which part of the cycle you start. What matters is the quality of experience. So if the quality of experience is not good, no matter where you start, the learning experience is going to be poor. So that's a big misunderstanding about learning cycle. Another one of the learning style, it is probably because where David started in 1960s and 70s in terms of more focus on psychometrics and based on other learning style inventory and cognitive style and all kinds of things, is that learning style viewed as a trait. I mean, I'm sorry, it's you know, it's the fixed trait that you don't change. And that's not true because learning cycle is the dynamic model. Changes and you have to revise your experience all the time. That's what's going on in your life. So what we're trying to do with all this research and learning style inventory is really, you know, make people aware that the learning style, nothing more than is a state. It's a different way that you come into the learning cycle. That's only the beginning part of the learning style. You know, the style is the way, different way that you move around the learning cycle. So that's another misunderstanding. And I think people started getting it more, that it's more of a state. It's a sort of one point in your learning journey, and then you move on to different places, which comes to the idea of learning flexibility. So I think these are one of the major misunderstandings in terms of perception of the philosophy of experiential education, which is much more than doing stuff. Mm-hmm. Unless you have educative experience, there's no experiential learning. So that's, I think, is a misunderstanding, which I think it's being much better understood, you know, probably broadly, what I see from the research. And learning cycle, connection to learning cycle, learning style in terms of the process of learning, I think those are the things that we have to really clarify more. That's where I think the area that I think needs to be explicitly, you know, clarified more. Yeah, thank you, Alice. David, anything you would like to add? What can you share about your observation?
Pretty nice thoughts there. You know, one thing I've learned in looking and working with the research literature over these many years, and I've been first of all really gratified that people would take up the ideas of experiential learning and love them so much that they would do a doctoral dissertation, Ilke, on it. That's not an easy thing. And so there's just an amazing amount of research that's going on. And the other observation is that there is a lot of misunderstanding in that literature. And a lot of it, in my mind, has to do with depth of scholarship, that many people will pick up, say, the learning cycle and then proceed to do a major critique of the learning cycle without having read experiential learning and calling it, you know, well, this is a way oversimplified model, which is all right to call it that, but it's not true. It's probably, it's kind of a problem with the literature, is that people say, oh, I know all about that. You know, Kolb, yeah, I've heard about that. And so they've got 2 or 3 things they've heard about it. And so that's kind of, it's just the state of research, and particularly as we are now worldwide in research, the access to resources and scholarship is much harder, and communicating across languages and cultures. So there's a lot of misinterpretation. Mm-hmm. However, and then I guess the other part was, has experiential learning been understood well so far? was the other question I think you were asking.
Yeah.
And I would have to say that we are just at the beginning of a flowering of understanding about experiential learning. For example, really when we're talking about experiential learning, we're talking about all learning, because that's what learning is learning from experience. However, what my particular perspective, and that's only one perspective on experiential learning, but my particular perspective brings the work I see my role not as a creator, but as a vehicle to pass on to future generations the ideas of the foundational scholars, William James, John Dewey, John Piaget, Vygotsky, I won't name Carl Rogers, Mary Parker Follett. These were all people who were writing at the beginning of the 20th century, and whose voices were drowned out by a theory of learning and an approach to learning and cognition that really had no role for experience and the voices of these foundational scholars. And having grown up in college in a psychology department where I got a great education, but it was a behaviorist department, and we were literally punished if we wrote in our papers anything about internal thoughts and feelings and experiences. And that, it's okay to punish me as a student, but they also punished William James and John Dewey, and that is a more historical disaster than, in my mind. And so to bring these voices back, we talk about when we publish articles today, like the journal will say to you, oh, but that article was published more than 5 years ago. As though suddenly there's an expiration date on knowledge, that if it's 5 years old, it's no good anymore. And so people do not look back to these scholars. And I tell students, actually, if you want to make a career, go back and read these foundational scholars, and you'll find a whole menu of items for your research that you can bring up to the present time with a fresh face that will make your career.
David, if there was a newspaper of this Congress, tomorrow's headline would be, we are just at the beginning.
Yes.
No, I love that word. I mean, we are just at the beginning that make world understand experiential learning better. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This gives inspiration and motivation to work more, like as academia, as civil society, to make experiential learning be more understood by going back to the foundational scholars. İlke, anything you would like to add?
Yes, I can add something about these questions. I can explain the misinterpretations of researchers and educators in Turkey on my observations during my studies. Researchers generally get stuck with the classification of the research participants in terms of learning styles instead of studying on whole theory. We may interpret this as using or applying the cycle partially rather than misunderstanding it. Of course, these studies are also scientifically valuable, yet still incomplete, I think. When I observe the situation through the lens of the teachers, I can say that I see a perception that the experiential learning is suitable for science lessons, but difficult for other disciplines. And I even met some teachers who considered that the experiential learning could be applied only out of the classroom. That's why it was difficult to practice for them, they said.
Wow.
Yeah, in Turkey situation, I can say
These are the prejudices on experiential learning.
Well, it's not only in Turkey.
Not only in Turkey, yeah, David, you're right.
Yes.
Well, a few words from my side. Well, I would like to also emphasize this misunderstanding of this. Let's play, and this is the experiential learning. Alice already talked about, yes, this playful learning space is also important, but this is not only. This is a little part of experiential learning. But I can address one really misunderstanding, especially in European youth works, while taking this chance to clarify. Dave, I explained this to you, as you remember, also I think in the conference in Cleveland in 2017, this learning styles inventory by Peter Honey and Ellen Mumford. So there is a big misunderstanding, this is my observation, in our field, that people are thinking that this is Kolb learning styles. Or people are just putting the experiential learning cycle and this Honey and Mumford's model around, which is actually not working. So this is really a big misunderstanding. But I would like to really ask you kindly, David, could you please explain why this model, this styles of Mumford and Honey is not suitable with the learning cycle? Could you please just explain briefly that everyone will understand like these are two different things?
Well, they are two different things. I knew Alan Mumford actually, and we had many good conversations and so on. And they felt what Alan told me was that they wanted to create an inventory that was more culturally appropriate for the United Kingdom. And so they changed the wording, they changed the item structure. As you can see, it's a very trait-based kind of approach. And so it's a different instrument. And from my point of view, that's fine. You know, you have to have in science, you have to have numbers of things going on, and different people have different approaches, and let them fight it out over the years about which one is better and so on. So I'm perfectly fine with that. However, there have been a number of studies relating the learning style inventory to the Honey Mumford, to other validation studies of the Honey Mumford, and aside from kind of a general embracing of the learning cycle, there's not much relationship to, say, the Kolb learning style. So it's a different instrument. And I have trouble interpreting I haven't seen a lot of research on it, but there is some, I know, but I haven't seen a lot of validity in research for the Honey Mumford. It may be there, I don't know, but I haven't seen it.
Okay, thank you. This was very important, David, and thank you, because people, I mean, when you go even to Google Images, you write Kolb learning styles, and you can see, you know, you write learning cycle and you see different cycles, and you write learning styles and you see this Mumford and Honey's model. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, people can use, as you said, different tools. But when you put this to the experiential learning cycle, this is not working. So that's why here I would like to emphasize again that if you are using experiential learning cycle, then Kolb's learning styles really is a natural part of this cycle, and then you can put educator role profiles around. So it's a beautiful pattern. to
But
understand.
it's the source of that confusion and misunderstanding that you were talking about. No question about it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Just a good, very good example of that.
Yeah. Okay, so can we go to solve the downside of the cycle a bit, talk about a bit abstract things? Actually, we have already started talking about abstracts. Alice, David, we know that, so you have this web page. Let's also share in the chat for the people who don't know. So your web page of learningfromexperience.com. So I'm also sharing in the chat section, so our participants can have your web page. So in this web page, we know that you have a bibliography. So you are monitoring every year, so the studies on experiential learning. So can I ask you, what do you think, in which direction do you think the studies are tending? Is there any certain direction, like recently, that any new direction, any surprises that you are witnessing? And what this can tell us about the future of experiential learning studies?
Well, kind of to the future, I guess, to start off with, it is really amazing to me the burgeoning of research on experiential learning. Mm-hmm. My particular window as a researcher, of course, is the research literature. And so I read journals and follow citations of the experiential learning theory articles to identify new articles that have come out. And so in the bibliography, so I thank you for mentioning learningfromexperience.com. If the participants go to that website, they will find the research library tab and click on that. And when you do that, you'll see that there's a sentence that says experiential learning theory research can be found on Google Scholar. And if you click Google Scholar, all of the articles that I've written on experiential learning come up. And underneath one, it says cited by. You click that and you get the whole list of all the different citations that are there. My last time I looked, there were 102 total citations of these articles on Google Scholar. It's hard to know if that big or little or, you know, what, but what has, if you go back 5 years, there were 40,000 citations. So just in the past 5 years, this research, body of research has more than doubled. And also in the library there is a list of, is a bibliography, which I go through every year. I'm just finishing this year's research and going to update. There's a bibliography that has what will be 5,000 articles that I have picked over the years from 1971 until the present that are of particular interest. You know, a lot of citations are kind of ceremonial citations. So that somebody says experiential learning, I need to have a citation here. So they go Kolb 1984, you know, and that's it. That's not really a useful article for the most part. But I picked try to pick good ones. So like in 1999, there were 1,000 articles in the bibliography. So not today, there's 5,000. Another metric is ResearchGate, where I get citations sent to me and who's reading the articles. So currently it's about 5,000 people a week are reading. So there is a huge infrastructure of researchers that is growing tremendously around the world. And of course, that's also a tribute to the internet, that we are able to have this kind of connection and facilitation of one another's work. And Ilke and I can talk about her research and so on. So what are the directions, you ask? There's a lot of different ones. There's a lot of studies like what you're doing, Ilke, of kind of experimentally study the impact of an experiential learning intervention or class, shall we say, and a traditional class and so on. And this is in just virtually all kinds of fields, particularly in medicine, particularly in engineering, and other areas, just, you know, agriculture, social work, physical education. I mean, it's just all over the place. That's a big kind of continuing thing. That's kind of the meat and potatoes of the research in a lot of cases. These practice, you know, how does this work in practice? What I see as a big trend is experiential learning, just to say online experience. Let's call it online experiential learning. There is a tremendous challenge here to stop the process that's going on now, which is the replication of the lecture classroom on the internet, you know, as opposed to taking advantage of the fact that when people are on the internet with their phone or whatever, they are in their context of life. And there are ways to integrate that into what they're learning or what they are taking out of their experiences in life to learn from, and having the program facilitate drawing out learning from a team meeting that you were in or whatever. So I just see tremendous things happening there, particularly, and this is a kind of something, like there's learning analytics is a big thing now. So a lot of research coming out of China, which is looking at, you know, you watch how somebody learns online and you can tell their learning style by the choices they're making, and you can feed that back to them and do things. There's flaws in that research, which I guess we can't go into right now that I see in much of it, but that's a kind of exciting thing. Gaming, simulation, we're moving toward a state where, as you all know, for a long time, we have been slowly being absorbed into the internet and into our screens. And so this process is continuing, and maybe experiential learning will facilitate this, because what we need to do is to make online learning experiential in the sense that people are experiencing in the process of being online. And so that often, one of the key things that involves is participation. So simulations and the possibility of interacting with what's going on and making contribution and so on is something is coming, and it's all very exciting. I think that would be the main thing I would see.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, this online experiential learning, it's good to hear that there are researches and studies are increasing on this, because the need is increasing, right? Especially in this pandemic situations and everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Alice, anything you would like to add? Any surprises that you're witnessing?
Well, what I'm following, along with what Dave was saying, because the research on experiential learning, which is exponentially, is growing, particularly since 1999. There are at least 33 academic fields that they're doing, research, and they're all doing different interesting research, but also they're converging on the need of their discipline to respond to the need of the 21st century. So there are definitely discipline-specific needs that they are pursuing through experiential learning. But, and that's what Dave was talking about. But my, I think, interest, which I've seen, it's much more of a sort of a broad philosophical change, I think, in our society. And this is related to learning spaces. And when we wrote this article in 2005, Learning Style and Learning Spaces, this article citation has never ceased to be cited. And actually it's growing. And normally journal article after 1 or 2 years died, but it still continued to grow, and it's been cited at a substantially high, level in all kinds of disciplines. And because this is part of the research and experiential learning, the learning spaces is really my key area of interest. So what's happening with the research and experiential learning in the beginning, between 2005 up until probably 10 years, the research was sort of shaky, was more kind of anecdotal and, how to make a better space for the student. And there was not much substance into it. But lately, I think I see beginning of kind of serious, practice and research on learning spaces all across these disciplines. And because I think the learning environment is becoming a really critical component of learning. That means if you don't create a learning environment, no matter what you do, the learning doesn't happen. So people started noticing probably far more than before on the idea of the learning spaces. And that's number one. And number two, like Dave was saying, this idea of the learning space is catching on an online learning environment.
Yeah.
So the research is becoming far more nuanced, and they're willing to embrace more complex issues surrounding experiential learning. What they call this article, there's a really great article that came out of China and Australia in recent months. And they started talking about the importance of understanding entanglement of experiential learning spaces. And what that means is the spaces naturally needs to be entangled, mingle, intersect one another. So the notion that this is the academic learning space where you study discipline-specific paradigmatic studies. And then you go into the outside classroom, this is where you study outside stuff like, learning real life stuff. And then there are also informal learning spaces where you learn informal stuff without much awareness. And these are all different part or component learning spaces that happen simultaneously at the different stage in our lives. And the reason why I find it very promising is because it goes back to the principle of experiential learning, which learning is holistic. So that means if you want to embrace learning as a holistic process, you can't divide what happened in the classroom as a formal education or non-formal education that you Mustafa is doing with youth education and so forth. And then informal education that happens in our lives, in our, probably confined in our families. So that leads to, for me to hope that the idea that academic learning has to be separate than non-formal education and so forth, I think that's going to start eroding because that's not real stuff. And I think when we were talking about holistic learning, it was far more theoretical. But now what's happening is experientially, people are realizing that if higher education does not catch on to what's happening in a non-formal setting, an informal setting, basically what they're teaching academic environment does not happen in application side. So I think up until now, there was so kind of, this is what happened learning space and academic stuff. And then this is what happened learning space in non-formal spaces. And that I think started going to become more and more sort of a blurred. And to give an example, in Singapore, the Ministry of Education declared probably in 2009 that in K-12 education, all grades are going to be eliminated. And they're still doing this in ongoing process. And other one is this co-curricular, you know, outside the classroom service learning kind of thing is becoming mandatory. Mm-hmm. And it's because real life skill, attainment does not happen in isolation in class one space or another. So this idea of the entanglement of learning spaces, I think is a very promising trend, because now the practice is catching on with the theory. And what they're saying is what the theory said in theory worked, but in practice not working. So actually the practice is actually pushing the theory up in the experience of the research. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I find it very promising in terms of, seriousness, really. And there are far interesting, more intricate research going around. So what are the components of learning spaces, So what are the skills and how this collision happens? And I think the collision happens, it has to happen. So I think that's where I see the one aspect of future of growth and experiential learning is really looking at the experiential learning spaces. That makes sense.
Alice, thank you very much. Yeah, especially emphasizing this learning space, the importance of learning space. And I'm really happy to hear that, researchers are increasing on this, because everyone thinks about how I'm going to turn around the cycle, but no one is talking about and considering the ecosystem where you are going to turn around the cycle. So first ecosystem and then methodology, then other things.
Well, I think because I think the research has moved sort of, there's a developmental aspect of research, which started with, learning style, then, the learning cycle and so forth. And then experiential learning model is starting to encompass a far larger part of the model, which is more in line with, foundational philosophers, So the experiential learning, narrowly viewed, is all about learning style. Some people say, Ronald, that this is a learning style theory, which is not. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that learning style inventory, it is part of education, but it's a very small part of the experiential learning theory as large. Because if you look at the book of David wrote, learning style inventory does not come until the first chapter. The first chapter is about philosophy of experiential learning. It's about structure of knowledge. It's far more meaty than people think. So that's another thing is that we have to understand the experiential learning theory is much, much larger and deeper and complex than, its
steps. Well, Alice, thank you very much. Okay, I'm just checking my clock. So we have to finish 11:45. So somehow we have like 8 or let's say 9 last minutes. Ilke, that's why, can I ask you to very quickly, or would you like to?
Okay, maybe just
Turkey specific
short sentences. Okay, from Turkey. Yes, studies on experiential learning in Turkey has been increased recently. When we analyzed the dissertations, we observed that 54 dissertations were written on the experiential learning at 30 different universities.
Wow.
And 46% of them were written in the last 5 years, just like David said. It's similar situation in Turkey. Yes, last 5 years. And however, as I mentioned before, and Alice mentioned also, most of them focused on just learning styles again. Only 10% dwelled on the experiential learning cycle holistically. Because of our short time, I think this is enough now, Mustafa.
Yeah, Alice.
I don't want to take their time.
Yeah, thank you. Well, okay. But I mean, even we have this good news that it's increasing, right, in Turkey. Because this is what we are advocating and trying to, as an NGO here, to promote experiential learning more. And yeah,
very high quality research too. I absolutely find it to be the scholarship. I was kind of digging scholarship earlier, but the scholarship is very fine. So that's really interesting that you're seeing this huge increase. Alice and I were talking that this is the decade of experiential learning. The 20s are going to be where big things happen for experiential educators.
Great. Before passing to the last question, which is about, some for the active experimentation side or the action side. So what can you suggest us, the experiential educators from academia, from civil society, how to promote and develop experiential learning more? But before that, let me just pass you one question, which was related with the previous conversation. Romy asked, Romy, right? Dave, Alice. Romy is one of our trainer colleagues from our network. So you can also open the Q&A button and read it, but I'm going to read you for also translation. So they said, hello, David and Alice. I always understood that there was a clear flow to the experiential learning cycle. We can enter and exit the cycle at any point, but that there is a direction. I recently heard from colleagues that the 4 modes of the cycle can actually be in any order, and it's not always so neat and tidy. I would love to hear from you both. What do you think about it? If it is thinking, experiencing, reflecting, and acting, is it still following the experiential learning cycle?
Yes. And this is exactly what I said, that there's a misunderstanding that the learning cycle always has to go in one direction. Because if you always go in one direction, that's not a cycle, that's a straight line.
That's a line.
Right? So that's the misunderstanding, because in real life is not that clear. You think some, and then you just stuck on the thinking, and then you don't act on it and start making assumption inferences, come to wrong conclusion, and then only to discover that by having an experience, realize your thinking was wrong, right? And then you act on something and you don't reflect, so you keep making the same mistake over and over again. Because reflect, quickly, and you keep acting, experiencing, right? You're still going on to the cycle, but you emphasize one cycle over the other. So, and that's the real life, what happened. And so to suggest that you go only one direction, by experience reflecting, if you could all do that, probably we live in a perfect world, right? So we experience, we like some, you think about it, make consumption, and then act on it and keep going. But that's not the way it is. However, as we become more aware of it in the learning cycle, I think we start more identifying what is the best way that we go around the learning cycle. And we start more emphasizing and start more equally balancing and embracing this, tension that we have. Why should I act now when I want to reflect more? Or why should I reflect when I still keep acting more? So these are dilemmas that we encounter in our learning situations. And these are not linear process. It's pretty messy, and it looks like a cycle, but it looks like sometimes like a flat balloon, or kind of elongated pear-shaped learning cycle, or so forth. So I think that's how I would answer Romy's question.
Thank you, Alice. David, do you think it's okay, or you would like to add any? Would you like to respond?
I think that Alice hit on the point, is that you can kind of learn better if you follow the learning cycle. But, learning style, this is another misunderstanding of learning style. Learning style, if you have a thinking style, that does not mean you score high on abstract conceptualization. It means that you have a particular shape to your learning cycle, which doesn't pay much attention to experiencing it all, does a little bit of acting and reflecting, but is primarily down in the thinking stage. So a learning style is a way of going around the learning cycle, and these are all different.
Yeah. All right. So I have 2 more minutes, but I think I can make it 3. So, okay, last words, but let's talk about the action, the last part of the cycle, as we arrive at the end, which hopefully can bring new experiences later on to turn. What can you suggest? I mean, what do you think that educators, researchers, we, the civil society, I mean, to develop experiential learning more, in which direction, on which part we should work more? What do you think? Is my question clear? Or would you like me to specify a bit more?
Well, what I can say, and which I think it's exciting, the way it's moving. So in a larger scheme of things, I see, for example, in Hong Kong, I was just reading a paper that came out of Hong Kong. They're using experiential learning model in their current life situation they're living in, this, idea of activism and advocacy, So experiential learning model is empowering people to demand, for example, social justice. So that's something that's interesting. And another one is in the same line, for example, addressing the idea of the sustainability. So they're started using not only academic setting for teaching and learning, but they use the experiential learning model to put a frame around large issues that the globe is facing now. So that's quite very, I think, exciting, because this is a time that I think we all live in this earth with turmoil and huge challenges. Mm-hmm. And what I see blossoming, I think, in the research is that experiential learning framework from those, groups, a societal group, which is trying to empower the disenfranchised, the poor, or the inequality and so forth. You're finding useful, talk about a Freirean, mm-hmm. philosophy right in the center. And I think that's what is very exciting to me, that it's a large framework, philosophical framework from which they can really, push some action toward some greater cause. And so that's one thing that I find it very interesting. Mm-hmm. And so again, I think I go back to the idea of this space, that the learning space is becoming something, there's a possibility that is going to become much larger than learning space in the classrooms. It's a space for voices to be heard, and spaces for big changes to happen. And so that's, I think, it's a very interesting trend that can become bigger in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Thank you for also addressing non-formal education, with the social transformation and seeing the larger picture. David, what would you say? What you can suggest us? I mean, us is a crowded group who are advocating experiential learning, working on experiential learning. What can you say us?
My current thing is experiencing. As I look at it, one of the things that keeps us personally mm-hmm. from learning is that we're not experiencing. We come into situations already prejudging what they are, who the people are, what their beliefs are, and act based on that rather than being present, focusing our attention on the other person or the situation, hearing them and letting them have an impact on us. That's experiencing. And without it, we can't learn.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you. So inspiring. Thank you, David. İlke, last words.
Actually, I don't want to say any word after David and
Yes.
Alice about this issue. That's enough for everyone. I just want to thank you again for their supporting us. And I really appreciate David's and Alice's supports to us, Turkey, and our studies. Thank you for being with us, and I wish everyone a productive Congress.
Yeah, thank you, İlke. Well, greetings from my heart. Thanks from my heart, really. It was great to be in this circle. I see this as a circle, even this is like squares, but I feel like this is a circle. And being part of your circle, it's amazing. And I'm sure that our attendees also enjoyed this conversation. I can just say, guys, let's keep cooperating. This is what can I say as a civil society person. Because I'm from civil society and I see that in academy, there is a huge knowledge there which civil society needs, but also in civil society in non-formal education, there is a huge experience that the academy is a bit missing, you know, so but this cooperation will bring a bigger power, bigger strength for social transformation, which Alice emphasized. Thank you very much. I'm very happy that we opened this Congress with this conversational space. And in 10 minutes at 12, okay, in Istanbul time, the parallel session starts, dear attendees. So you already received your email that according to your selection of parallel sessions where we are going to hear presenters, academic papers. So enjoy this 10 minutes little break and then please be punctual in our parallel sessions. Thank you very much all. I wish a great Congress for everyone, even it's virtual. And thank you very much, Alice and Dave again. Hope to see you soon.
Pleasure to be with you.
So much. Great to be with you. Thank you, Ilke.
Great.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, David.